The morning sun had barely kissed the horizon when 16-year-old Lily Hartwell stepped out of her family's small wooden cabin. The year was 1692, and the tiny settlement of Pine Ridge was just beginning to stir with the sounds of another difficult day. Roosters crowed in the distance, and smoke began to rise from chimneys as families prepared their morning meals. Lily pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she walked toward the vegetable garden behind their home. The autumn air carried a chill that seemed to seep right through her thin dress. Her bare feet were already familiar with the cold morning dew that covered the grass, and she moved carefully between the rows of turnips and carrots that would help feed her family through the coming winter. The Hartwell family wasn't wealthy by any means. Lily's father, William, worked as a blacksmith's assistant, and her mother, Ruth, took in washing from the more prosperous families in town. Every vegetable from their small garden mattered. Every herb Lily could gather from the forest helped stretch their meager supplies. As she knelt down to pull weeds from around the turnip plants, Lily heard footsteps approaching on the dirt path that ran behind their property. She looked up to see old Mrs. Bridget Thornton making her way toward the town center. Moving much slower than usual, Mrs. Thornton was known throughout Pine Ridge as a sharp-tongued woman who had something to say about everyone and everything. "Morning, Mrs. Thornton," Lily called out politely, as her mother had taught her to do with all the town elders. The older woman stopped and stared at Lily with narrowed eyes. There was something different about her expression today, something that made Lily feel uncomfortable. Mrs. Thornton had always been stern, but now she looked almost frightened. "You're out early, girl," Mrs. Thornton said, her voice carrying an odd tremor. "Yes, ma'am." "Just tending to the garden before the sun gets too high?" Lily replied, wiping dirt from her hands on her apron. Mrs. Thornton took a step closer, and Lily noticed that the woman's face looked unusually pale. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she kept glancing around as if she expected someone to appear from behind the trees. "Strange things have been happening lately," Mrs. Thornton muttered, more to herself than to Lily. "Milk going sour overnight. Chickens refusing to lay eggs. My own cat won't come near me anymore." Lily didn't know what to say to that. She had heard similar complaints from other families in town over the past few weeks. The harvest hadn't been as good as expected, and several people had fallen ill with fevers that seemed to linger longer than usual. "Perhaps it's just the changing season," Lily offered gently. "Sometimes animals act differently when winter approaches." Mrs. Thornton's eyes suddenly focused on Lily with an intensity that made the young girl take a step backward. "You would know about animals, wouldn't you? People say you have a way with them, a natural way." The words hit Lily like a physical blow. She had always been good with animals, it was true. Injured birds seemed to heal faster when she cared for them. Sick farm animals often recovered after she spent time with them, speaking softly and offering them herbs she had learned about from her grandmother. But there was nothing unnatural about kindness and knowledge passed down through generations. "I just try to help when I can," Lily said quietly. Mrs. Thornton was breathing heavily now, and beads of sweat had appeared on her forehead despite the cool morning air. "Help?" she repeated with a bitter laugh. "Is that what you call it?" Before Lily could respond, Mrs. Thornton suddenly clutched her chest and let out a sharp cry of pain. She stumbled forward, nearly falling, and Lily instinctively reached out to steady her. "Don't touch me," Mrs. Thornton screamed, jerking away from Lily's outstretched hands. "Don't you dare touch me with those cursed hands." The old woman's shouts brought people running from nearby homes. Lily's parents appeared at their cabin door, along with several neighbors who had heard the commotion. Everyone gathered around as Mrs. Thornton continued to gasp and clutch her chest. "She's done something to me," Mrs. Thornton wheezed, pointing a shaking finger at Lily. "The witch has cursed me." Lily felt the blood drain from her face. The word witch hung in the air like a poison cloud, and she could see the way people's expressions changed as they looked at her. Fear replaced concern, and suspicion took the place of neighborly care. "Now, Bridget, calm yourself," said Mr. Thomas Fletcher, who lived 2 houses down. The girl was just tending her garden. But Mrs. Thornton wasn't listening to reason. Her breathing became more labored, and she began to sway on her feet. She looked at me, she gasped. Looked at me with those green eyes, and I felt the evil enter my body. I felt it like ice in my veins. Lily had always been self-conscious about her unusual green eyes. In a town where most people had brown or blue eyes, hers stood out like emeralds. Her grandmother had once told her they were beautiful, but now they felt like a mark against her. "Please," Lily whispered, looking around at the growing crowd. "I didn't do anything. I was just working in the garden." Her mother pushed through the circle of people and put a protective arm around Lily's shoulders. "My daughter is a good girl," Ruth said firmly. "She helps people. She helps animals. There's nothing evil about kindness." But the crowd was growing larger, and Lily could hear whispers spreading like wildfire. People were remembering things, real or imagined. The baker's wife mentioned that her bread had been turning out poorly ever since Lily had walked past her shop last week. The miller recalled that his horse had seemed nervous around Lily when she had stopped to give it an apple. Mrs. Thornton collapsed to her knees, still pointing at Lily. "She's killing me," she wheezed. "Can't you see? The witch is killing me with her evil magic." Dr. Harrison, the town's physician, pushed through the crowd and knelt beside Mrs. Thornton. He felt her pulse and listened to her breathing, his expression growing more concerned by the moment. "We need to get her to bed," he announced. "She's having some kind of attack." Several men helped carry Mrs. Thornton toward her home, but even as they lifted her, she continued to point at Lily and mutter about curses and witchcraft. The crowd began to disperse, but Lily could feel their eyes on her, studying her, judging her. Over the next 3 days, Mrs. Thornton's condition worsened. Dr. Harrison tried everything he knew, but nothing seemed to help. The old woman spent her time in bed, sometimes delirious with fever, sometimes lucid enough to repeat her accusations against Lily. Word spread quickly through Pine Ridge and to the neighboring settlements. People began to remember other strange occurrences, other times when things had gone wrong after Lily had been nearby. The fact that she knew about herbs and healing was suddenly seen as suspicious rather than helpful. On the third evening, as the sun was setting behind the pine trees that gave the town its name, Mrs. Thornton took a turn for the worse. Dr. Harrison was called to her bedside, and soon after the town's minister, Reverend Jonathan Whitmore, arrived to offer last rites. The old woman's final words, spoken in front of several witnesses, would seal Lily's fate. With her dying breath, she pointed toward the Hartwell cabin and whispered, "The witch. The green-eyed witch. She has murdered me with her dark magic." By dawn the next morning, Constable Robert Hayes was standing at the Hartwell family's door with a warrant for Lily's arrest. The charges were witchcraft and murder, crimes that carried only one punishment in the colony. As they led the terrified 16-year-old girl away in chains, her parents could do nothing but watch helplessly, knowing that their daughter's life now hung by the thinnest of threads. The town of Pine Ridge had found its witch, and everyone knew what happened to witches in 1692. The jail cell where Lily spent the next 2 weeks was nothing more than a cramped wooden box with iron bars. The floor was covered with dirty straw that hadn't been changed in months, and the only light came from a small window high up on the wall. Rats scurried in the corners, and the smell of unwashed bodies and human waste made breathing difficult. Lily had never been so frightened in her entire life. She curled up in the corner, wrapping her thin shawl around herself for warmth, and tried to make sense of what had happened. Just days ago, she had been a normal girl helping her family survive. Now she was accused of murder and witchcraft, crimes she couldn't even imagine committing. Other prisoners shared the cramped space with her. There was old Henry Porter, who had been caught stealing bread from the baker, and young Timothy Ross, who had gotten into a fight with another man over a gambling debt. Both men looked at Lily with a mixture of fear and curiosity, keeping their distance as if her supposed evil powers might somehow affect them too. "Is it true what they're saying about you, girl?" Henry asked one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did you really put a curse on old Mrs. Thornton?" Lily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I never hurt anyone," she whispered back. "I was just working in my garden. I tried to help her when she fell sick." Timothy spat into the straw. That's what they all say. My grandmother always told me you could spot a witch by their eyes. Yours are greener than pond water. The words stung worse than a physical blow. Lily had always thought her eyes were simply unusual, maybe even pretty. Now they felt like a curse marking her for death. Every day, Lily's parents came to visit, bringing what little food they could afford and trying to comfort their daughter. Her father's face had aged years in just a few days, and her mother could barely speak without breaking into tears. "We're trying to find someone to speak for you," her father said during one visit, gripping the iron bars until his knuckles turned white. "Maybe if we can get enough people to say good things about you, the judge will listen to reason." But Lily could see in his eyes that he didn't really believe it would help. In a town gripped by fear of witchcraft, reason was a rare commodity. 2 weeks after Lily's arrest, Judge Cornelius Ashworth arrived from the capital city. He was a tall, stern man with gray hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to look right through people. The judge had presided over dozens of witch trials in other towns, and everyone knew his reputation for harsh sentences. The trial was held in the town's meeting house, the largest building in Pine Ridge. Word had spread to neighboring settlements, and people traveled for miles to witness the proceedings. The wooden benches were packed with spectators, and more people stood along the walls and crowded near the windows. The air was thick with excitement and fear, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Lily sat in a wooden chair at the front of the room, her hands bound with rope. She wore the same dress she had been arrested in, now dirty and torn from her time in jail. Her parents sat in the front row, holding hands and praying silently. Judge Ashworth called the court to order by banging a wooden gavel on his table. The room fell silent except for the sound of people shifting in their seats and whispering prayers. "We are here today to determine the guilt or innocence of Lily Hartwell, accused of practicing witchcraft and causing the death of Mrs. Bridget Thornton," the judge announced in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. The first witness called was Dr. Harrison. He walked to the front of the room with slow, careful steps, his medical bag clutched in his hand. "Doctor, you examined Mrs. Thornton during her final illness," Judge Ashworth said. "Tell the court what you observed." Dr. Harrison cleared his throat nervously. "She complained of chest pains and difficulty breathing. Her condition worsened rapidly over 3 days, despite my best efforts to treat her." "Was this a natural illness?" the judge asked. The doctor hesitated, glancing around the packed room. I cannot say for certain. I have seen similar symptoms before, but Mrs. Thornton insisted that she had been cursed." "And did you believe her claims?" Another long pause. "She was very convinced that the girl had done something to her. She spoke of it constantly, even in her delirium." Judge Ashworth nodded and made notes on a piece of paper. "You may return to your seat." Next came the baker, Mr. Peter Wells. He was a heavy-set man with flour still dusting his apron, and he looked nervous as he stood before the judge. "Tell the court about your interactions with the accused," Judge Ashworth commanded. "Well, Your Honor, it was about 2 weeks before Mrs. Thornton died," the baker began, wringing his hands. "The girl walked past my shop, just like she did most days. But that afternoon, something strange happened." "Continue." "I had just pulled fresh loaves from the oven. Perfect they were. But the next morning, half of them had gone moldy overnight. Never seen anything like it in 20 years of baking." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lily wanted to stand up and explain that bread sometimes went bad for perfectly normal reasons. But her lawyer, a young man named David Fletcher, who had been appointed by the court, placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Had you ever experienced such rapid spoilage before?" the judge asked. "Never, Your Honor. And it happened again the next week, right after she walked by. I started crossing myself every time I saw her after that." The testimonies continued throughout the morning. The miller's wife claimed that her cow had stopped giving milk after Lily petted it. The blacksmith said his horse had thrown a shoe immediately after Lily had fed it an apple. One by one, people who had known Lily all her life stood up and turned ordinary, everyday events into evidence of witchcraft. The most damning testimony came from a group of young girls from the town. Led by 14-year-old Rebecca Turner, they told a story that made the entire courtroom gasp in horror. "She came to us in the forest last month," Rebecca said, her voice shaking with apparent fear. "She had a black cat with her, and she told you she could teach us magic." Lily's heart sank. She remembered the day Rebecca was talking about, but it had been nothing like the girl described. Lily had found Rebecca and her friends trying to catch frogs by the creek. She had shown them how to move slowly and quietly so the frogs wouldn't be frightened away. There had been no black cat, no talk of magic. "What kind of magic did she offer to teach you?" Judge Ashworth asked, leaning forward with interest. "She said she could show us how to make love potions and how to curse our enemies," Rebecca continued, her voice growing stronger as she saw the effect her words were having on the crowd. "When we refused, she got angry. Her eyes turned darker as she said we would regret not joining her." "Did any of you experience ill effects after this encounter?" The other girls nodded eagerly. One claimed she had nightmares for a week. Another said she had developed a rash on her arms. A third insisted that she had been unable to say her prayers properly ever since. Lily's lawyer tried his best to defend her. He called character witnesses who spoke of her kindness and her willingness to help sick animals. Her parents testified about her good nature and her regular attendance at church services. The young man even tried to suggest that Mrs. Thornton's death might have been from natural causes, but the tide of public opinion was strongly against Lily. The townspeople had already made up their minds, and they wanted someone to blame for their recent troubles. Every failed crop, every sick animal, every stroke of bad luck was now seen as evidence of the witch among them. Judge Ashworth deliberated for less than an hour. When he returned to the courtroom, his face was set in stone. "Lily Hartwell," he announced in a voice that rang with finality, "you have been found guilty of practicing witchcraft and causing the death of Mrs. Bridget Thornton through supernatural means." The courtroom erupted in cheers and gasps. Lily's mother fainted in her seat, and her father caught her before she hit the floor. "You are hereby sentenced to death by hanging," Judge Ashworth continued. "The execution will take place at dawn, 3 days hence. May God have mercy on your soul." As the guards led Lily back to her cell, she caught sight of her parents' devastated faces in the crowd. Her father was weeping openly, something she had never seen him do before. Her mother had awakened but looked as pale as death itself. The crowd followed them outside, some shouting accusations, others calling for immediate justice. Children threw small stones and women spat in Lily's direction. These were people who had known her since birth, neighbors who had shared meals with her family, friends who had played with her as a child. Back in her cell, Lily curled up in the corner and tried to prepare herself for death. She was only 16 years old, and in 3 days her life would be over. She had never kissed a boy, never had children of her own, never traveled beyond the borders of Pine Ridge. All of her dreams and hopes would end with a rope around her neck. The witch trial was over, and Lily Hartwell had lost. The morning of the execution arrived gray and cold, with heavy clouds hanging low over Pine Ridge like a burial shroud. Lily had not slept at all during her final night. She spent the dark hours praying, crying, and trying to find some peace. In her heart, before facing death, when the first light of dawn crept through her cell window, she heard the sounds of preparation outside. Hammering echoed across the town square as the final adjustments were made to the gallows. Voices called back and forth as people arrived early to claim the best spots for watching the execution. Constable Hayes unlocked her cell door just as the church bell began to toll 6 times. "It's time, girl," he said quietly. Despite everything, Lily could see that he took no pleasure in this duty. His usual stern expression was softer today, almost sad. Lily's legs felt weak as she stood up. The constable placed iron shackles around her wrists and ankles, the metal cold against her skin. The chains were heavy and made walking difficult, but she forced herself to stand straight. She would not give the crowd the satisfaction of seeing her crawl to her death. Her parents waited outside the jail, both looking as if they had aged 10 years in the past 3 days. Her mother rushed forward and embraced her daughter, chains and all. sobbing against Lily's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, my dear girl," her mother whispered. "I'm so sorry we couldn't save you." Her father stood behind them, his face a mask of grief and rage. "This is not justice," he said through gritted teeth. "This is madness." Reverend Whitmore, the town minister, approached with his Bible in hand. "Lily," he said gently, "it's time to make peace with your Creator. Do you wish to confess your sins before meeting your Maker?" Lily looked at the minister who had baptized her as a baby and taught her Bible verses every Sunday. "I have no sins to confess regarding witchcraft," she said firmly. "I never hurt anyone. I never practiced dark magic. I go to my death with a clear conscience." The Reverend nodded sadly. He had known Lily all her life and had never seen any evidence of evil in her. But the law was the law, and a judge had spoken. The procession to the gallows began slowly. Constable Hayes led the way, followed by Lily in her chains. Her parents walked on either side of her, and Reverend Whitmore came behind, reading prayers. From his Bible, a crowd of townspeople followed, some calling out curses, others maintaining respectful silence. The gallows stood in the center of the town square, a wooden platform about 6 feet high with a crossbeam extending over it. A noose hung from the beam, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. The sight of it made Lily's stomach turn, but she kept walking. Judge Ashworth stood on the platform wearing his black robes, looking down at the growing crowd with satisfaction. The executioner, a hooded man brought in from another town, waited beside the noose. His face was hidden, but Lily could see his hands shaking slightly. The entire population of Pine Ridge seemed to have gathered in the square. Men, women, and children pressed forward to get a better view. Some had brought stools to stand on, and others had climbed onto wagon beds and rooftops. Street vendors moved through the crowd selling meat pies and ale, treating the execution like a festival. Lily was led up the wooden steps to the platform. Each step felt like climbing a mountain, her legs barely able to support her weight. When she reached the top, she could see over the heads of the crowd to the forest beyond the town. For a moment she imagined running toward those trees, escaping into the wilderness where no one could hurt her. Judge Ashworth unrolled a piece of parchment and began to read the charges and sentence in a loud voice that carried across the square. "Lily Hartwell, you have been found guilty of the practice of witchcraft and the murder of Mrs. Bridget Thornton through supernatural means. Lee barely heard the words. She was looking out at the crowd, searching for friendly faces among the sea of people who wanted to see her die. She spotted her old teacher, Mrs. Catherine Mills, standing near the back with tears streaming down her face. Young David Fletcher, her lawyer, stood with his head bowed, unable to watch. And may God have mercy on your soul," Judge Ashworth concluded. The executioner approached with the noose, and Lily felt her knees begin to buckle. This was really happening. In just a few minutes she would be dead, and all because an old woman had fallen ill after speaking to her in a garden. Just as the executioner was about to place the rope around her neck, the sound of galloping hooves echoed across the square. Everyone turned to see a lone horseman riding hard toward the town center, his horse's hooves throwing up clouds of dust. The rider was a tall man with broad shoulders and weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. His dark hair was streaked with early gray, and his clothes were the practical garments of someone who worked with his hands. He rode with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in the saddle, but there was something urgent in his posture. "Wait!" the stranger called out as he reined in his horse at the edge of the crowd. "Stop this execution!" Judge Ashworth frowned down at the interruption. "Who are you to interfere in the business of this court?" The man dismounted and pushed through the crowd toward the gallows. People stepped aside, sensing something powerful about his presence. "My name is Benjamin Cooper," he announced in a voice that carried clearly across the square. "I'm a cattle rancher from the Western Territories." "This is highly irregular," Judge Ashworth said, his face reddening with anger. "The sentence has been passed and must be carried out." Benjamin Cooper climbed the steps to the platform, moving with deliberate purpose. Up close, Lily could see that his eyes were a deep brown, kind but tired, as if he had seen too much sorrow in his life. I invoke the ancient rite of marriage. Intervention, Cooper said, pulling a worn book from his coat. According to colonial law, a condemned woman may be saved from execution if a suitable man offers to marry her and take responsibility for her actions. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Judge Ashworth snatched the book and began flipping through its pages, his expression growing more frustrated by the moment. "This law is centuries old," the judge protested. "Surely it no longer applies. Old laws are still laws until they are officially changed," Cooper replied calmly. "I believe you'll find everything is in order." Lily stared at this stranger in amazement. She had never seen him before in her life, yet he was risking his own safety to save her. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Cooper looked at her with those kind, tired eyes. "Because I've seen enough injustice in my lifetime," he said quietly. "And because everyone deserves a chance at life." Judge Ashworth continued reading, clearly hoping to find some loophole that would allow him to proceed with the execution. The crowd grew restless, some shouting for the hanging to continue, others curious about this unexpected development. "I traveled for 5 days to get here," Cooper continued, addressing the crowd. "Word of this trial reached our settlement, and I couldn't stand by while an innocent girl was put to death based on superstition and fear." "Innocent?" someone in the crowd shouted. "She's been found guilty by a proper court." Cooper turned to face the crowd, his presence commanding attention. "I've lived on the frontier for 15 years. I've seen real evil, and I've seen good people destroyed by fear and ignorance. This girl is no witch. She's a victim of mass hysteria," the crowd began to argue among themselves. Some supported Cooper's intervention, while others demanded that the execution proceed as planned. The noise grew louder and more chaotic. Finally, Judge Ashworth looked up from the law book, his face grim. "The law is clear," he announced reluctantly. "If a man of good standing offers marriage to a condemned woman and she accepts, the execution must be stayed." He turned to Lily. "Do you accept this man's proposal of marriage?" Lily looked at Benjamin Cooper, this stranger who had appeared like an answer to her desperate prayers. She didn't know anything about him except that he was willing to save her life. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes, I accept." "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Ashworth said through gritted teeth. "But know this, Cooper. You are now responsible for any future crimes she may commit." "I understand," Cooper replied, helping Lily down from the gallows platform, "and I accept that responsibility gladly." As they walked through the disappointed crowd toward Cooper's horse, Lily felt as if she were walking through a dream. One moment she had been facing death, and the next she was married to a complete stranger who had saved her life. The townspeople parted before them, some angry at being denied their spectacle, others amazed by the dramatic turn of events. Lily's parents rushed forward to embrace their daughter one last time before she left Pine Ridge forever. "Take care of yourself, my dear girl," her mother sobbed. "Write to us when you can." Her father shook Cooper's hand firmly. "Thank you," he said simply. "You've given us back our daughter's life." Cooper helped Lily onto his horse, then mounted behind her. As they rode out of Pine Ridge, Lily took one last look at the town where she had been born and raised. She was leaving everything she had ever known, but she was alive, and that was more than she had dared hope for just minutes earlier. The stranger who had become her husband rode in silence, giving her time to absorb what had happened. Lily didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, she had hope. The first few miles away from Pine Ridge passed in complete silence. Lily sat in front of Benjamin on his horse, her body stiff with shock and uncertainty. The execution dress she still wore was torn and dirty, and the iron shackles had left red marks on her wrists where the constable had finally removed them. Just before they left town, Benjamin's arms surrounded her as he held the reins, but he was careful not to hold her too tightly. She could feel the warmth of his body behind her, steady and reassuring. Yet she knew absolutely nothing about this man who had just become her husband. When they reached a small stream about an hour outside of town, Benjamin finally spoke. We should rest here for a bit, he said gently. Let the horse drink and give you a chance to catch your breath. He dismounted first, then helped Lily down from the horse. Her legs were shaky, and she stumbled slightly before finding her balance. The reality of what had just happened was beginning to sink in. She was alive, but she was also married to a complete stranger, traveling to an unknown place. With no idea what her future would hold, Benjamin led his horse to the stream and let it drink while he filled his water bottle. Lily sat on a fallen log nearby, trying to process everything that had occurred in the past few hours. You must have questions, Benjamin said, settling down on another log a respectful distance away. I imagine you're wondering who I am and why I did what I did back there. Lily looked at him closely for the first time. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with lines around his eyes that could have come from either laughter or squinting into bright skies. His hands were rough and calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard for a living. There was something gentle in his expression, something that made her feel a little less afraid. Why did you save me? She asked quietly. You don't even know me. Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, staring at the water flowing over the rocks. In the stream. 3 years ago, I had a wife, he said finally. Her name was Rose, and she was the kindest woman you could ever meet. She helped anyone who needed it, whether they were sick animals or struggling neighbors. He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. Some people in our town didn't like that she knew about herbs and healing. They started whispering that maybe her knowledge wasn't natural. When she got pregnant with our first child, she was so happy. But then she got sick with a fever, and nothing the doctor did seemed to help. Lily felt her heart clench as she saw the pain in Benjamin's eyes. The fever took both her and our baby, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. But even as she was dying, people were still whispering about witchcraft. Some said she had brought the sickness on herself through dark magic. Others claimed it was God's punishment for her unnatural abilities. I'm so sorry, Lily said softly. Benjamin looked up at her, and she saw a deep sadness that she recognized. It was the same look she had seen in her own reflection during those terrible days in jail. When word reached our settlement about your trial, I couldn't stop thinking about Rose, he said. I couldn't save her, but maybe I could save you. Maybe I could keep another innocent woman from dying because of fear and superstition. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sound of the water and the birds in the trees. Finally, Benjamin stood up and checked the position of the sun in the sky. We should keep moving, he said. We have a long way to go, and I want to put as much distance as possible between us and Pine Ridge before dark. As they rode through the afternoon, Benjamin told Lily about his ranch in the Western Territories. It was a 3-day journey from Pine Ridge, located in a valley surrounded by mountains where the soil was rich and the grass grew thick and green. I raise cattle mostly, he explained. Some horses too. It's hard work, but honest work. The nearest settlement is about 20 miles away, and the people there mind their own business. They don't ask too many questions about a person's past. Lily found herself relaxing slightly as she listened to him talk. His voice was calm and steady, and he spoke about his life with simple honesty. He didn't try to make grand promises or paint a picture of easy living. He simply told her the truth about what their life together would be like. I won't lie to you, he said as they stopped to rest the horse again near sunset. It's going to be different from anything you've known. The work is hard and the winters can be brutal. But you'll be safe there, and you'll be free to be yourself. That evening they made camp in a small clearing beside the road. Benjamin had brought supplies for the journey, including a thick blanket that he insisted Lily use while he slept on. The hard ground with just his coat for warmth. Tomorrow we'll reach the town of Millfield, he said as he built a small fire. We can buy you some proper clothes there and maybe a hot meal at the inn. Lily pulled the blanket around her shoulders and stared into the flames. Benjamin, she said hesitantly, what kind of marriage is this going to be? I mean, we don't even know each other. Benjamin poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks floating up into the darkening sky. I don't expect anything from you. That you're not willing to give, he said carefully. You needed saving, and I needed— Well, I suppose I needed to feel like I was doing something right for once. He looked across the fire at her, his expression serious. I have a big house, with plenty of room. You can have your own space until you decide what you want our relationship to be. Maybe someday we'll become true husband and wife, or maybe we'll just be friends sharing a home and a life. Either way is fine with me. Lily felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. She had been terrified that he might expect her to immediately become a real wife to him, but his words showed a kindness and respect that she hadn't dared hope for. What about children? She asked quietly. Someday, maybe, if that's something you want, he replied, but there's no rush. We have time to figure out who we are together. The next day brought them to Millfield, a bustling town much larger than Pine Ridge. Benjamin kept his promise and bought Lily 3 new dresses, a warm coat, and sturdy boots for walking. At the general store, the shopkeeper's wife took one look at Lily's torn execution dress and clucked her tongue in sympathy. Mercy, child, what happened to you? The woman asked as she helped Lily try on the new clothes. We had some trouble on the road, Benjamin said smoothly before Lily could answer. Bandits. My wife's things were damaged when they robbed us. The woman accepted this explanation without question, and Lily was grateful for Benjamin's quick thinking. She was already learning that her new husband was both clever and protective. At the inn that evening, they shared their first real meal together. Lily hadn't eaten properly in weeks, and the beef stew and fresh bread tasted like the finest feast. She found herself laughing at something Benjamin said about his ornery bull, and realized it was the first time she had laughed in longer than she could remember. You have a lovely smile, Benjamin said, and then looked embarrassed for speaking so boldly. Lily felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. For saving my life, for being kind to me, for giving me hope. Thank you for trusting me, he replied. I know this isn't easy for you. On the 3rd day of their journey, they finally reached Benjamin's ranch. Lily's breath caught in her throat as they rode over a hill and saw the valley spread. Out below them, rolling green pastures stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with cattle and horses. A winding river ran through the middle of the valley, and mountains rose up on all sides like protective walls. The house was larger than Lily had expected, built of logs and stone with a wide front porch and multiple chimneys. Smoke was rising from one of them, as she could see gardens and outbuildings scattered around the property. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's home, Benjamin said simply. Our home now. As they rode down into the valley, Lily felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. She felt safe. She felt hopeful. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt like she might actually have a future worth living. The girl who had nearly died on the gallows was gone forever. In her place was a woman ready to build a new life with a man who had shown her unexpected kindness and respect. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with courage, knowing that she had been given a second chance at life and happiness. 6 months had passed since Lily first arrived at Benjamin's ranch, and the transformation in her life felt almost magical. The pale, frightened girl who had nearly died on the gallows had blossomed into a confident young woman with color in her cheeks and strength in her arms. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as Lily kneaded bread dough on the wooden counter. Her hands, once soft from a life spent mostly indoors, now bore the calluses of honest work. She had learned to milk cows, tend chickens, plant vegetables, and preserve food for the winter months ahead. Morning, beautiful, Benjamin said as he came in from feeding the horses, his boots stomping on the wooden floor to shake off the dust. Lily smiled at him over her shoulder. Somewhere during those 6 months, the awkward politeness between them had grown into something warmer and more genuine. They had become friends first, then gradually something deeper had developed between them. Coffee's ready, she said, gesturing toward the pot on the stove. And Mrs. Patterson from town is coming by today to look at that moray you wanted to sell. Benjamin poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table, watching Lily work. You've gotten good at this, he said, nodding toward the bread. Better than Rose ever was, if I'm being honest. It had taken months before Benjamin could mention his first wife without that haunted look crossing his face. Now he spoke of Rose with fond memory rather than raw grief, and Lily took it as a sign of healing for both of them. She taught me well. Before she died, Lily replied, referring to her own mother's lessons. Though I never thought I'd be using those skills on a cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere. Do you miss it? Benjamin asked quietly. Your old life, I mean. The town, your parents, the familiar places? Lily paused in her kneading, considering the question. She did miss her parents terribly, and she worried about them constantly. But Pine Ridge itself, with its suspicious whispers and fearful glances, held no appeal for her anymore. I miss my mother and father, she said honestly, but I don't miss living in fear. I don't miss watching every word I say and every move I make, wondering if someone will twist it into evidence of witchcraft. She turned to face him, flour dusting her apron. Here, I can help a sick calf without anyone calling me a witch. I can know about herbs and healing without people crossing themselves when they see me. I can just be myself. Benjamin nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The people in Clearwater don't care about such things. They're more interested in whether you can pull your weight and whether you treat your neighbors fairly. Clearwater was the nearest settlement, a frontier town populated mostly by ranchers, farmers, and people who had come west to start fresh. When Benjamin had first brought Lily to town to introduce her as his wife, she had been terrified that someone would recognize her or that word of the witch trial would have reached them. Instead, the townspeople had welcomed her with the practical friendliness of frontier folk. They needed a new doctor since old Dr. Hendricks had died the previous winter, and Lily's knowledge of healing herbs and veterinary care made her a valuable addition to their community. Speaking of Clearwater, Benjamin said, Tom Bradley asked, if you could take a look at his prize bull tomorrow? Says the animal's been off its feed for a week. Lily nodded. She had become the unofficial veterinarian for the area, and her reputation for healing sick animals had spread throughout the valley. People brought their livestock to her from miles around, and she never charged more than they could afford. To pay, I'll ride over after breakfast, she said. Though I suspect his bull is just being stubborn about the new hay Tom bought. Some animals are particular about their food. As if summoned by their conversation about animals, a orange tabby cat appeared at the kitchen door, meowing loudly for attention. Lily laughed and opened the door to let him in. Hello, Rusty, she said, scratching behind the cat's ears. Are you here for breakfast, too? Rusty had appeared at the ranch 3 months ago, a scraggly stray who had apparently decided that Benjamin and Lily needed a cat. Despite Benjamin's initial protest that he didn't want pets around, Rusty had won him over by catching mice in the barn and providing companionship during the long winter evenings. That cat eats better than we do, Benjamin grumbled, but Lily could see the affection in his eyes as Rusty rubbed against his legs after breakfast. Lily walked out to the vegetable garden she had planted behind the house. The spring planting had grown into a thriving patch of beans, carrots, onions, and herbs. She had also started a medicinal garden with plants she had gathered from the mountains, carefully cultivating the healing herbs that had once made people suspicious of her. As she worked among the plants, Lily reflected on how much her life had changed. The fear that had dominated her existence for so long had gradually faded, replaced by a sense of purpose and belonging. She was no longer the victim of other people's superstitions. She was a respected member of a community, a healer, and most surprisingly of all, a woman who had found love in the most unexpected circumstances. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see a familiar figure riding toward the house, and her heart gave a little flutter of excitement. Benjamin was returning from checking on the cattle in the north pasture, and she found herself eager to see him. How did the fence repairs go? She called out as he dismounted near the barn. Good. Should hold through the summer storms, he replied, walking toward her with that easy stride she had come to love. But I've got something to tell you. Something in his tone made her look up from the carrots she was thinning. What is it? Benjamin sat down on the ground beside her, unmindful of getting dirt on his clean pants. I got a letter from town today. It seems there's been some news from back east. Lily's hand stilled in the soil. News from back east could only mean news about Pine Ridge, and she wasn't sure she wanted to hear it. Tell me, she said quietly. Judge Ashworth has been removed from his position, Benjamin said, watching her face carefully. Apparently there have been complaints about his handling of several witch trials, including yours. There's talk that some of the convictions might be reviewed. Lily sat back on her heels, processing this information. Does that mean... It means you were right all along, Benjamin said firmly. It means that what happened to you was an injustice, and people are finally beginning to recognize that. For a moment, Lily felt a surge of vindication. Then, unexpectedly, she felt something else entirely. Pity for the people of Pine Ridge who had been so consumed by fear that they had nearly murdered an innocent girl. I'm not sure it matters anymore, she said finally. What's done is done. I can't go back to being the person I was before all this happened. Would you want to? Benjamin asked. Lily looked around at the ranch that had become her home, at the man who had become her husband and partner, at the life they had built together. No, she said with certainty. I wouldn't change anything. Well, except maybe I would have liked to meet you under better circumstances. Benjamin laughed, the sound warm and genuine. I don't know. Our circumstances were certainly memorable. That evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Lily made an announcement that had been building in her heart for weeks. Benjamin, she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach, I have something to tell you. He looked at her, and something in her expression must have given her away, because his eyes widened with hope and wonder. Are you... he began. I'm pregnant, she said, unable to keep the joy out of her voice. We're going to have a baby. Benjamin stood up so quickly that his chair rocked backward. He swept Lily into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed with delight. When? He asked, setting her down gently as if she were made of glass. Late fall, I think. November, maybe December. Benjamin cupped her face in his hands, his eyes bright with tears of happiness. I love you, Lily Cooper. I love you more than I ever thought possible. I love you too, she whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. As they held each other on the porch of their mountain home, Lily thought about the girl who had once knelt in a garden in Pine Ridge, accused of witchcraft for the simple crime of being different. That girl was gone forever, but in her place stood a woman who had found love, purpose, and a future brighter than any dream she could have imagined. The witch trial that had nearly destroyed her life had instead led her to the greatest happiness she had ever known. Sometimes, she thought, the worst moments in life could become the doorway to the best ones. If you were brave enough to walk through them, the baby growing inside her would never know the fear and suspicion that had shaped her early years. This child would grow up free, loved, and accepted for whoever they chose to be. And that, Lily thought, was the greatest magic of all.